All right, so the first thing we want to talk about here is Benjamin Franklin and why we're beginning the unit with Benjamin Franklin. You guys know who Benjamin Franklin is, right? He was the big guy with the really terrible hair, flew the kite in the lightning storm. He did a lot of stuff, right? Benjamin Franklin's responsible for establishing the fire department, establishing libraries, post office, you name it. Pretty much all of our public institutions are a result of Benjamin Franklin. It's pretty amazing to think about what American society would have looked like if it hadn't been for Benjamin Franklin. But I think the introduction to Benjamin Franklin in your textbook is a great explanation for why he's at this transition point for us between the first unit and the second unit. Right? And the first line of the introduction to Benjamin Franklin in your textbook says, "To a remarkable extent, the writings of Benjamin Franklin represent the metamorphosis of New England literary culture from Puritan to Yankee." And that's really it, right? That what we've seen so far has been largely Puritan culture. And again, we know there were other cultures, right? But the driving culture in terms of cultural production, literary production, was the Puritan culture. And now Benjamin Franklin represents a shift away from the Puritan culture, something that is centered on that Puritan worldview and religious experience, to something that is more secular. It was really the idea here. Benjamin Franklin is a man of the Enlightenment, and unlike people like Jonathan Edwards, who were moved by the Enlightenment, but still were very much in that Puritan mindset, and so they were trying to create a religious experience that fitted within that Enlightenment view. Benjamin Franklin, along with Thomas Jefferson and most of the founding fathers, really were fully invested in the Enlightenment, and we'll look at that. One of the major things that I want you to take away from Benjamin Franklin is the new sort of core values that he establishes for America. When we looked at Winthrop, right, it was mercy and justice, and those were defined in terms of the religious community, the Puritan community, and those were the core values upon which this new civilization was being built. And you thought a little bit about how that's reflected in our own society now. It's not that we're devoid of mercy and justice. We know we come up short in terms of mercy and justice. But they are probably not the driving values in our culture. And what you'll see in Benjamin Franklin is the establishment of what most people associate with probably the core values of American culture. And that is described at the bottom of page 205 in the text, right, which is Benjamin Franklin, over the years in his Poor Richard's Almanac, emphasizes the values of hard work and thrift, all right, with the aims of achieving wealth. And that's really what it's all about. For him, the American dream was the ability to achieve wealth. That when you came from Europe, from countries like England, like France, and we'll see this a little bit with Crève Coeur as well later in the unit, but you didn't have an opportunity as an average person to accumulate wealth. Everything really belonged to the nobility, and one of the great things about America was you had the opportunity to accumulate wealth. In terms of land and also capital, right? Actual money, goods, and other sorts of things. And so that was his goal. And so it's really interesting to see that shift away from mercy and justice as the central values towards hard work and thrift. So in terms of what it means that he was a real Enlightenment sort of individual, if we look at the bottom of page 206, the introduction tells us that Franklin believed that people were naturally innocent, that all the mysteries that charmed the religious mind could be explained in ways that would promote human well-being, and that education, properly undertaken, would transform people's lives and set them free of the tyrannies of church and monarchy. So that first part, believe that people were naturally innocent. This is very different from the puritanical view, the Calvinist view, or the Catholic view even, right? The religious view, one of the sort of core views of Christianity, right, is that people are not naturally innocent, that everyone is born degenerate since the fall of man in the events of the Garden of Eden. And so everyone needs to be redeemed, and if you don't fall into Christianity and the tenets that are taught by Christianity, then you're going to be saying you'll be a bad person is too general, right? But that your natural inclinations as a human being are selfish, violent, savage, and we'll see this again in Crève Coeur. So this is very different from Benjamin Franklin, and this is an Enlightenment idea. As well as the idea that mysteries that charm the religious mind can be explained, right, through observation of the natural world. And when he says that those mysteries that charm the religious mind, what he's really talking about there are the kinds of things that we see in Mather, right? Wonders of the invisible world. As well as the kinds of things that we see referenced in Bradford and Rowlandson and Winthrop as being the providence of God and these sorts of things. Essentially, Franklin is saying, and Enlightenment thinking here at the birth of what is the scientific revolution, right, is teaching that there are explanations for these things that seem wondrous to us in the natural world, and if we observe them and we record them, then we can begin to understand them. And in particular, he was interested in these apparently supernatural forces like electricity and magnetism, earthquakes and wind and all of those sorts of things that now fall squarely within the purview of science, that prior to this point really were seen as sort of unknowable miracles of God, right? So that's an important thing. Also, his focus on education as a mechanism for transforming people's lives and setting them free of the tyrannies of church and monarchy. And this is always a point of emphasis for me. And we'll see this much later in the semester when we look at Emerson and the Transcendentalists and their approach to education. But this notion that education, if it's done well, is intended to improve you as a human being and to free you basically from tyrannical influences of major institutions, whether it's the church, whether it's the government, whatever it is. And a big question for students, I think, always should be whether or not that's what education is doing for us now. You know, when you think about your own education and what is the value of the education, and particularly if you're in school as a young person who's just looking to get a job, right? If you're looking at your education just as a mechanism for getting a job for better pay, that's very different than what Benjamin Franklin is talking about here, that your education really should be preparing you for citizenship. It really should be preparing you to be an independent individual who can think and make decisions, think critically, right? Evaluate the world, think analytically, rather than just being a subject to these institutions. And so when we look at the two individual works by Franklin, these are the things that we want to pay attention to.